So I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to UN funding to Gaza, but UN funding to Gaza has been massively cut. And when I say massively cut, I mean it's lost over 73% of its budget. The countries that have now decided to end funding to the UN project for aid to Palestine includes the United States, Germany, Japan, France, Switzerland, Canada, Dutch, British, the Italians, the Australians, the Finns, the Icelanders, I believe, Estonia, Austria, and Romania. And there will be more. There will probably be more. This means that they've lost a tremendous amount of their budget, more than just a small majority, but a big majority, a vast majority of their budget has been lost. Now, the reason why all these countries are pulling out, when you would think this type of funding is needed at its most, is because multiple UN employees in Gaza have been accused of, wrong story, this is a different story, this is about a possible Israeli war crime, has been accused of killing people during the October 7th attacks. That they involved themselves in the October 7th attack. Read a little bit about it. An Israeli intelligence document shared on Monday, and that should be noted, it's Israeli intelligence, with CBS News and a number of other Western news outlets, spelled out allegations against a dozen UN employees whom Israel says participated in the Hamas October 7th terror attack. The document claims 7 staff members of UNRWA, the UN Humanitarian agency that helps Palestinian refugees, stormed into Israeli territory during the attack, including 2 who participated in kidnappings. The allegations against UNRWA staffers prompted the US and some other Western countries to freeze funds vital to the work of the agency, which is a lifeline for desperate Palestinians in war-torn Gaza. The UN fired 9 of the 12 accused workers and condemned the abhorrent alleged acts of staff members. The accusations comes after years of tensions between Israel and UNRWA over its work in Gaza, where it employs roughly, and this is important, 13,000 people. So, I want to throw out a few things right off the bat. So the first thing I want to throw off the bat is UNRWA obviously has to fire anyone who was involved in the October 7th attack, anyone who was involved in kidnapping people. And for the last 3 people who were accused by Israel, and we need to remember this, that this is Israeli documents, if there's anything that ties them, they should be fired as well. And if not, then not fired. But that depends on an investigation. We should not just immediately take the Israelis at the word. We need to look at the facts. We need to look at the evidence. So that's the first thing. Okay, second thing is this. I believe that a compromise could easily be found here, and I don't have any reason to believe that the United States shouldn't take this if immediately offered, and all other people who are funding UNRWA. A call up with UNRWA to quickly resolve this is necessary now. People are starving in Gaza now. People are dying in Gaza now. Not tomorrow, well, probably tomorrow too, but this is an aid that can just wait till tomorrow. People are starving now. People are dying now. Women are giving births, getting C-sections without anesthetic right now. They need it desperately. And undercutting that effort when UNRWA is the main supply line, the main agency to supply food and resources to the Gaza Strip, ending that now and having that be in the air so the people on the ground, UNRWA on the ground, is thinking, oh, snap, where do we know we're going to get our next funding? Where do we know we're going to get our next shipment? They're going to have to start rationing, which means less food, less medicine, and less supplies to the people of Gaza. They have to find some compromise, and they have to find it quick. And if that compromise is as much as hold an investigation to see which UN employees work for Hamas, and if they work for Hamas or they work for one of these organizations, either fire them or make them stop working for the organization, probably fire them. I don't know why they can't find a solution as soon as possible, why this shouldn't have been resolved immediately after the fact. But waiting and holding this, waiting now for this to resolve, or crossing your arms and saying, we're going to wait a month or 2 to make a point, that means we're just going to let more people die, because out of 13,000 people, 13 participated. If the goal is to stop terrorism in Gaza, to stop the violence in the region, starving people is not a way you push them away from Hamas. Starving people is not the way you push them away from Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Starving people is not how you push them away from radicalism. Have a man losing his wife to a C-section performed imperfectly, which goes wrong and kills her, or loses their wife due to a lack of medicine. I think it'll just radicalize them further. And if we're providing weapons over to Israel, and the Palestinians can't leave into Gaza, and the Palestinians can't leave into Israel, they're stuck in Gaza, food doesn't just magically appear, they need it. We've known for a very long time our relationship, or the UNRWA's relationship with Hamas. Hamas tries to influence them, pressure them in certain ways. We know that they steal aid. We know Hamas steals aid. We know that they've been doing that for a very long time. But we continued to support the aid project because we knew that it was desperately needed. But right now, when it's needed the most, is when we cut it. Whether the point is to increase this leverage over UNRWA to get more compromises over time, and they think only by waiting to be able to get the bigger compromises, or it's to increase the leverage that the Israelis have in negotiations over hostages so they can get more hostages. And I think from the Israeli perspective, that's probably what they're hoping for, that by cutting off the UNRWA funding, that means Hamas obviously won't be getting their cut, but that also means the Palestinian people are going to be going through a horrible time, not going to be able to get any aid, and then through desperation, maybe they'll cave. I don't know what the United States is waiting for. OMG, Dylan, please. The point is to kill Gazans. You know what? I'm gonna keep talking. I don't want to get into a deviation about dumbing these issues down. I don't know if every single country here that has cut this aid, like if the Dutch just want to kill the Gazans, if the Swiss just want all the Gazans to die, if the Belgians or all the other people, if everybody who was donating for years as the top donators to Gaza all just want them to die. I think that for the Israeli government, it could be that they want them to suffer in order to increase their leverage. And there might be certain ones among them who believe that. But for a lot of them, I think it might have to do with political pressure, either trying to show that they stand with an ally in the region. Either way, I think it's terrible. But don't dumb it down, because if we dumb it down, then we can't deal with the problem. OMG, I had no idea the Gazans would die without food, said no one ever. You're not talking about anything. Do you have better sources on the evidence? Last I saw, the source was some guy the IDF tortured. Yeah, it's Israeli intelligence. Now, I doubt all these countries would just start pulling aid, all of them, unless there seemed to be something to it. And honestly, if I'm being blunt with you, it's not hard for me to believe, but it's also not hard for me to understand that doesn't mean now we starve everybody in the Gaza Strip. For example, and this is something Biden understood at the start of his term. At the start of his term in office, he removed the Houthis from the terror watch list. Now, did he remove the Houthis from the terror watch list because he didn't believe the Houthis engaged in torture, or that the Houthis didn't engage in terrorism in some instances, or in any instance, or that the Houthis hadn't been extremely brutal or committed war? No, the reason he removed them from being on the terrorist watch list, which was one of the last foreign policy decisions Trump made before he left the White House, was to put them on the terror watch list, was Trump did it in order to strangle aid into Yemen, and Biden removed it in order to lift that stranglehold on aid into Yemen, because he knew that if these organizations worked with the Houthis, which was necessary in order to get aid into Houthi-controlled territory, to get fuel, to get food, to get medicine, etc., then while they're designated a terror group, then these NGOs are going to be placed under sanctions. Then these NGOs are not going to be able to make money, and these NGOs are not going to be able to help anyone. So Biden knew when going into office at the start of his term that this would probably just end up making peace more difficult, kill more people, cause more trauma. And I think I still hold the position that Biden did at the start of his term. Anyway, that's my position on it. I was displaced on November 12th. I left the camp after my house was destroyed and my cousins and all the people in our houses were killed. I came to the school here in Rafah. As you can see, this is how life here is. We collect straw and put in the plastic bags for baking because the price of a bundle of firewood is 13 shekels, and I can't afford that. I take this straw and pay the bakery 1 shekel for every 10 loaves. As you can see, I live in a plastic tent. Tonight, when it rained, we were swamped. There's no bedding. UNRWA provided me with 2 mattresses and 2 blankets. The rest was given to me by people from here. They gave it to me provided that I return it when the situation is over. I have breast cancer and it is hard for me to sit by the fire. I have no medication. My treatment was interrupted. These services are still important and they still need to be supported. Senator Sanders did release a response in reaction to the cutting of UNRWA aid. Senator Sanders' statement on suspension of funding to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. Senator Bernie Sanders today released a statement about the decision of the United States and other nations to freeze funding for the United Nations Agency UNRWA that provides water and essential services for Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, 1.1 million of whom are already at risk of starvation. More than 26,000 Palestinians have been killed. This is from the Palestinian, what's it called? The Gaza Ministry of Health, yes. Have been killed in this war, 70% of whom are women and children. Today, hundreds of thousands of children face starvation and disease. Obviously, it's not acceptable for any of the 13,000 UNRWA employees in Gaza to be involved with Hamas, and allegations against the 12 people charged must be investigated. However, we cannot allow millions to suffer because of the actions of 12 people. The U.S. and other countries must restore funding to starve off this humanitarian catastrophe. The 12 people are just the tip of the iceberg, which is why, if that is just the tip of the iceberg, the quick compromise that should be come to is investigation of, and I don't know if they can do it immediately because they're probably busy, but an investigation generally, which UNRWA will work with whoever is in control of Gaza after the fact, after this war is over, will work to make sure that the organization is only full of people who are not working for organizations that are deemed terror groups or not working for or engage in any behavior like that. But in the meantime, these people still need food. So unless everybody voting to stop the aid wants to create their own new aid agency that can make all these local ties on the ground, that can establish connections, that can get approval, that can move resources into the region, that has the logistics, that has around 13,000 employees on the ground in Gaza who are willing to die in order to provide these services. Yeah, I think there's not a lot of people who want to immediately grab that job. So we need to work with the tools at our disposal. The tools may be imperfect, but they're the tools we have. If you have a rusty screwdriver, you don't throw it away and use your bare hands or just pretend you don't need to do the job anymore. Do the best with what you have. Well, that's enough of that. I do want to just wrap up with this, which is, by the way, I don't know if you guys saw, but this is how Fox is now talking about it. Biden delivered $121 million in taxpayer funds to Hamas-tied UNRWA since October. And this is like a scandal. This is a scandal. Anyway, I wanted to show you guys Talk TV hosted by Piers Morgan. We always go back to those Piers Morgan's reacts. They had on Dennis Prager of Prager University. You know, PragerU, if you ever seen those YouTube videos for their conservative school, which isn't a school. This is like an online course thing. They also produce a lot of like children's media to make conservative kids. And Cenk Uygur, who's running for president, but we don't know if he can be president because, you know, he's born in Turkey. But he's running for president. And by the way, I don't even think that should be a disqualifying factor, by the way. But he's running for president and he's hosting the Young Turks. Piers Morgan had them both on to show both sides of the argument. Let's watch.
Cenk Uygur, I want to play a clip from this interview between Douglas Murray and Benjamin Netanyahu, where he talks about the war will take as long as it takes. Let's watch this.
We have to win in Gaza. We have to achieve total victory. Hamas cannot be left standing, coming out of the ruins with a V sign and saying, we'll do it again and again and again. What I say to our American friends, whose help I appreciate a great deal, I said,
until he acknowledges the need for a Palestinian state, maybe it won't be Hamas that comes out of the ruins of the V side. Maybe it'll be Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Maybe we'll be thrown a curveball and it'll be the PFLP. But it'll be somebody. If you treat people with a lack of dignity and you don't give them representation, you don't give them an ability to rule themselves, they will inevitably revolt, reject, and resist you. It is inevitable. It is inevitable. It happens with the Kurds. It happens in many places all around the world. It happened with the Irish. It happened with the Algerians. It happened with the Vietnamese. It happened with all sorts of people. It happened with the Afghans. It happens everywhere. If they refuse to give them a state, then that's going to happen. And I understand that people talk about security concerns for Israel, considering what just happened. But the offers for a state that are being made by Saudi Arabia and the United States are, we'll create a state, but it will be demilitarized. You'll have control of their airspace, and the Arab world will handle reconstruction of Gaza. What a deal. What an incredible deal. And is rejected outright because a Palestinian state is agreed. Even though polling from Herat seems to suggest that actually the majority of Israelis approve of said deal. 50-something to 30%. 50% in favor, 30% against. 20% divided.
The war will take as long as it takes, but it will result in total victory because our battle is your battle and our victory is your victory as well.
Now, Jake, I saw today that one of his cabinet was suggesting that they believe 25% of Hamas terrorists have now been killed and 25% more wounded. And so in their estimation, 50% of the enemy has now been effectively taken out of the battlefield. A, do you think that is probably...
I have no clue if those numbers are real, accurate. I have no idea.
...probably true. And B, what do you make of what Netanyahu said?
I mean, is it true? It could be true. It could be true. That sounds like a number that's possible, considering how brutal the fighting has been, and since it went on since October of last year. But I have no data to base it off of besides like just, guesstimating. And that's what Cenk will do, and that's what Dennis will do on these numbers too. Well, that's all they can do. Anybody on this show, because they don't have the information.
About this effectively, whether people like it or not, they're going to finish this job.
Yeah, so I'll address the propaganda first. There's no way of confirming any propaganda that comes out of Israel. Those are made-up numbers. But let's assume for
you can't say they're made-up numbers while also saying you don't know if they're true. Yeah, I mean, if you could say there's a history you can point to of them lying about numbers. For example, when the Russians invaded Ukraine, they said they destroyed the entirety of the Ukrainian Air Force, which is still operating today, and they destroyed more tanks and vehicles than Ukraine even had. That's something you can point to and say, this makes me question anything they're going to put on numbers in the future. So you can't just dismiss the numbers outright. You can't confirm them either. That's why I'm saying I have no clue if they're real or not. It's impossible to say. All you can really do is guesstimate or go off their previous statements. So it'd be better to provide an example if you wanted to dismiss it outright as fake.
a second that it was true. Okay, so you've taken down half of...
Okay, dope. He's going to treat it at least it might be true, but he still should have just started outright.
First, there's no way of confirming any propaganda that comes out of Israel. Those are made-up numbers. But let's assume for a second that it was true. Okay, so you've taken down half of Hamas and killed 26,000 some odd people. Does that mean you're going to kill another 26,000? How many Palestinians?
Well, I don't know how. I assume the civilian death toll probably decreased the longer the war goes on, depending on how aid. If aid effort stays solid and people aren't literally starving to death, which is a real risk with the UNRWA stuff getting cut, by the way, which is why I don't want UNRWA stuff to get cut. The probability of civilians dying in the urban combat is probably going to go down than when it was originally at the start of the war, because a lot of people have since moved from a lot of the areas of fighting. But also, if the Israelis continue to push and push and push and condense more and more Palestinians in one area, then it could risk reverting to many of the highest death counts from the start of the invasion, the initial bombardments. So it depends on how the battle goes, on how many people are going to die, but we don't know for sure. But, I mean, it could be, but it all depends on how the battle goes and how it evolves.
Is America supposed to help you murder for your nonsense objective, which never made any sense in the first place? Which leads me to the second part. Netanyahu says two absurd things. One is an effort to avoid accountability. He kept saying to Douglas over and over again, Oh, in terms of what went wrong on me not defending Israel on October 7th when they needed the defense, not offense, not killing random innocent Palestinian civilians, but actual defense. He says, oh, we'll get to that accountability after the war. Well, okay, when is the war going to be over? He says, well, we have to have total victory. What does that mean? You have to kill every member of Hamas? Well, that everybody.
By the way, you hold soldiers to account during the war, because you want to get them to account while they're doing the bad things, so you can stop them in the act, so they don't do more bad things before it's too late. Reverse what they did. You can't unshoot a civilian.
We'll get to that accountability after the war. Well, okay, when is the war going to be over? He says, well, we have to have total victory. What does that mean? You have to kill every member of Hamas? Well, that everybody knows that's impossible. So, oh, look at that. He set up an impossible standard for the war to be over so that it's never over and we never get any accountability.
I mean, it's true. It is an impossible standard. Like, if he said we're going to clear Hamas out of Gaza, and then we're going to do our best to hunt them down and make them a shell of their former self and one day get rid of them. But when he just says total victory, like, that is such a vague enough, like, barrier. Like, we have no idea. I can make assumptions, but.
Finally, the idea that America should fight Israel's war for it is absurd. No.
And by the way, it is important if they continue this bombing campaign outside of the borders of Israel, because depending on how the fighting goes, it can, as we can see with the 3 soldiers who just died in Jordan, it can end up affecting us as well, since we have assets and soldiers and American lives in the region, not only of our military personnel, but of civilians as well.
Oh, a hard no. We should send no money to Israel going forward to kill innocent Palestinians, or as long as they do the occupation. And now they're dragging us into a giant war in the Middle East that they're going to ask us to pay for, both in blood and treasure. There's no Americans that are actually in favor of that, other than neoconservatives that dragged us into Iraq and that debacle over there. So my answer to Netanyahu is a hard no. No way do I want to go to war with Iran to help your political career.
Dennis Prager, do you think Benjamin Netanyahu is long for this world as the leader of Israel? Because he's so unpopular domestically. The polls have never been worse for him. You get a feeling of somebody where the war is almost his last stand as leader. And in a very cynical way, if he stays in it long enough and can claim victory over Hamas, that might be his only way of maintaining power.
I appreciate Piers asking that question to Dennis Prager, of all people. A good question.
It's hard to imagine another Israeli leader acting differently. There is this perception in the West, and I'm neither a Netanyahu fan nor a Netanyahu opponent, but it is hard to imagine.
I am. I don't think somebody who tries to pin the Holocaust on Palestinians. You know, that dude told a crowd of people, while in politics, by the way, I think it was actually after he was already prime minister for a time. I have to remember exactly when. I think it was in the early 2000s. He said that the Palestinians gave Hitler the idea of doing in all the Jews. That it actually originated with the Palestinians. And on just a personal, scummy level, that is awful. Not even talking about his corruption, his bigotry, and the people he works with and surrounds himself with, like Ben Gvir, or is just absolute unchanged position, his position that's unchanging, which is no future Palestinian state, which will just produce more instability while being the security candidate. In fact, Netanyahu's whole pitch was he was the security candidate. He was the person who was going to protect Israel. Hey, you know, the other guys might be better on the economy. I might be a little corrupt. I don't know, maybe a little bit. But hey, I'm going to keep you safe. Till he didn't. That's why he's unpopular.
An Israeli leader who would say, you know, Hamas.
I could get into it deep. I could talk about Netanyahu's rhetoric leading to Israeli politicians getting. There's so much lore to it, but I'll leave that for your own guys. You guys can look that up yourselves.
But it is hard to imagine an Israeli leader who would say, you know, Hamas butchered our people on October 7th, raped our women, burned families alive, want to destroy us, want to kill every Jew that they can find, but we won't respond militarily. In Israel, there is virtual unanimity. There may be disgust with that man individually. I have no idea. The British kicked out Churchill after World War II. People are very fickle about their about their political leaders, so I have no interest in what the polls are. All I can tell you is I can't think of an Israeli leader who would be acting differently.
Yeah,
I think the difference between Churchill and Netanyahu would be that Churchill became, he rose to the position of power because appeasement, the other policies had failed. Netanyahu didn't get into power because other security plans outside of his failed. He's not like what happened right now. And if he was to become victorious and try to use that to stay in power, the security apparatus in Israel was designed by him and his cronies. He's the longest serving prime minister in Israeli history. The security issues that they faced that led to those people dying that day were issues that his government left unaddressed. He failed. So it would be less of a Churchill. I mean, I don't know. It's not really a good comparison, but it would have to be Chamberlain getting them into the war and then saying, okay, I'll get us out of it and through total victory. I don't know. It's just not I don't think Churchill is a good comparison.
That's probably true. Jake, I want to talk about this disturbing report which has come out about the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, where there were murmurings about potential involvement of some of their members in what happened. We've now seen a Wall Street Journal investigation which seemingly establishes from a dossier, actually the New York Times as well, an Israeli intelligence dossier, alleging that 200 workers from the UNRWA are Hamas or Islamic Jihad operatives, didn't provide detailed evidence. The dossier also alleged that...
No detailed evidence for that, but the 12 they have more evidence for, I think.
12 workers crossed into Israel on October the 7th with the Hamas terror group. UNRWA has sacked 9 of those employees and says it's investigating. Another report by the Wall Street Journal, citing also Israeli intelligence dossier, alleges 1,200 of the UNRWA's 12,000 employees in Gaza have links to Hamas or Islamic Jihad. Now, I'm sure your first response will be, well, I'm not going to believe Israeli intelligence dossiers, but the fact that the UNRWA has already sacked 9 of these people suggests there's a clear problem there.
Yeah. So there's 2 different issues here, Piers. So first, you're right. I don't believe Israeli propaganda. They say, oh, trust us. There's hundreds of them. No, I don't trust you at all. The IDF and the Israeli government have an enormous track record of lying on almost every occasion related to this war. But okay, so you say there's 9 folks who've already been terminated, and that's fair, and that's definitely true. So obviously there must have been some evidence. Okay, great, fantastic. I want accountability. I don't want anybody involved in the October 7th attacks, and they've been fired. If you want to do a further investigation to see if anybody else was involved and you want to fire them, terrific, no problem.
This is a rational position.
But that's not the real issue here. The real issue is the right-wing Israeli government hates this organization because they help Palestinians. There's now 500,000 Palestinians that are starving.
Well, it isn't just that. That's probably almost certainly probably the largest motivating factor. But for some, it would also be, and this is what Israelis mostly point to me at least, is the amount of skimming off the top that is done by Hamas to pay for its efforts. That is done to much of the aid. That is what is complained to me the most by Israel. But I do think Netanyahu's government also wants to strangle the population. I think the very start of that has been very clear to me.
And the only people that are helping them is basically this organization. And Israel thinks, now their right-wing government thinks, well, look, if we can eliminate the one organization that's helping Palestinians, they'll starve more. That way, when we bomb them, when we kill them, and we starve them, there'll be no one to help them. So that'll help us with our ethnic cleansing when we try to...
I think it's...
push them into Egypt.
This right here, this is all just speculation, because now we're speculating exactly that the government's doing this, so eventually they'll all flee. We don't know. This right here is speculation. There are certainly people in Israel who want that. I would even say there's probably people in Netanyahu's government who would love that, but we don't know that's the position of the Netanyahu government. They have not stated that openly. In fact, they've rejected that. So that is speculation. And I think there's a conclusion that makes it easier for me and it's more understandable and goes with traditional military doctrine as well. It is tradition during a siege, whether you talk about the siege of Leningrad, whether you talk about the siege of really any city, to starve the population in an effort to either get the population to turn against those in charge and be like, okay, we're going to we give up, we want to surrender, and we're going to stop our government, or to make the people who are defending said city, who is supposed to care about it, you know, defend it. Now, we're talking about Hamas here, so I don't think this is going to get very far. I don't think Hamas is going to be like, oh no, another child has died. We now give, like, I don't think that's going to work. So there is a traditional military strategy that can go to this. You can still think it's immoral, and you have good reason to think so, but I think coming to this conclusion, I don't think he's justified that claim yet.
Which several cabinet ministers, including their national security minister, have now said that is what they want to do, which is
the national security minister said that what Israel wants to do is starve the Palestinian population so they all flee to Egypt, so then they can take over Gaza permanently. That's their position. He said that's the position of the government. I don't believe him. Can we look this up? Does anybody know what he's talking about? What is it?
With our ethnic cleansing when we try to push them into Egypt, which several cabinet ministers, including their national security minister, have now.
The international security minister. International security minister, Israel. By the way, I'm hoping he's wrong too. Number one, I don't believe that he said that that's the position of the Israeli government. I could believe he said that that's his position. I don't know if the Israeli government, but we'll look. I'm hoping he's wrong too, because it would be horrific. Israel, it's Azmat Yazut. Oh, it's Ben Gvir. Got you. He should have just said Ben Gvir. I didn't know this was the actual position of Ben Gvir. Yeah, no, this is his personal position. This is Ben Gvir's personal position. I believe that 100%. But we have no evidence that he made it to position of the government. You should have just said Ben Gvir. Everyone knows who Ben Gvir is. Nobody uses the full name. International security minister. But I mean, again, I can believe Ben Gvir believes that, and that's a reason to go after Israel's government. And I think that is the same reason why the ICJ, we didn't cover the ICJ ruling on the channel. I think we probably should have. The ICJ ruling was that it's possible, that a genocide is possible. And it said a lot of the things that I had, I'm not saying that I had said, but I had heard legal experts argue before, which is, we don't have any concrete evidence, but when you look at certain government ministers' statements, it leads you to believe that there is at least some sentiment that exists that warrants further investigation. So it was basically I don't know, maybe, maybe not. And that's basically my position of the ICJ. I basically share the position of the ICJ, where we don't have any solid evidence that that's the government's position, but we know there's people allied with the government who'd probably like it very much.
Said that is what they want to do, which is, of course, ethnic cleansing 101. So they're targeting this group to try to eliminate its funding, and it's working brilliantly. The Western powers don't actually want to help the Palestinians, so they're using this as an excuse to target the whole group. And one last thing that gives you a stark example of it. Let's say that there was 9 people, or even...
Note that he didn't contradict Ben Gvir. Well, in Ben Gvir saying, this is my position, or Ben Gvir saying, this is the position of the Israeli government that we're going to take over Gaza. Because I don't believe he said that. Because it would just, even if I feel like I would have heard that. I feel like that would have gone down the grapevine to me. He's said a lot of horrible things about his position and what he wants, but he also doesn't speak for the entire government, and unless he tried to and said, this is our government's position.
Been a couple hundred people inside Israel who helped Hamas on October 7th. It's not impossible. There could be collaborators, right? So does that mean we should get rid of funding for all of Israel? It's an absurd.
Also, statements by soldiers, and it's a very popular song in Israel right now. Okay, let me be clear. And I'll say this one last time, so I'll get it through to people. I believe there are people in Israel who genuinely want to genocide the Palestinians. I even believe some of those people are in Israeli politics. I even believe some of those people, at the very least, want to ethnically cleanse Palestinians, are even in the cabinet of the government. I believe that. But I don't know, even that's a societal issue that could lead to atrocities, dehumanization, things that are extremely worrying, if that is the official position of the Israeli government, either due to the fact that they don't think they could achieve it, either due to the fact that they know that the backlash would be too immense, either due to the fact that they still want to pursue normalization with other countries in the region, and it would be very hard to normalize with Saudi Arabia and act as a Saudi-Israeli axis against the Iranians if they've just ethnically cleansed every Palestinian out of Gaza permanently, when there's already when the Saudi position is not only not to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians, but they have to create a Palestinian state in order for them to normalize ties. So all I'm saying is that either due to backlash, economic reasons, diplomacy, whatever it is, we don't know that that is the position of the Israeli government. We do know that that is the position of at least people in the vicinity of the Israeli government and people who are allied in the Israeli government. We don't know that's the position of the government officially, or that they're officially pursuing that. And I do think that distinction at very least matters, because it changes our response. Because once active genocide is going on, then you have to ask about military intervention against the nuclear armed state, right? Not saying we're talking. The situation and response changes then if they're going and invading and they're not ethnically cleansing. I'm not saying that we shouldn't respond, just that we need to know the nature of the problem if we're going to be able to respond to it properly. You need to know whether it's Ben Gvir that's pushing this in the government and how to deal with that, or if it's, oh my God, the government's already adopted this position, so now we need to take an even more extreme. It's important. I hope I've made my position clear.
Absurd idea when you apply it to Israel, but somehow it's not absurd when you apply it to this organization from the United Nations. Of course it's absurd. They should keep the funding but fire anyone who was involved.
Dennis Prager, your response to this story?
Well, first, let me
read this chat from Jimbo Khan. So the cognitive dissonance doesn't kick in on you guys when you compare and contrast Ukraine and Gaza. I really don't even know what you mean by that. Not only are the wars very different, Ukraine didn't attack Russia. There wasn't like some big attack to start it, and like the motivating factors of what pushed people to invade, alliance structures, etc. It's very different. But I can both believe that the Palestinians and the Ukrainians deserve a state. And I can also believe that people shouldn't be chopped up in their bedroom, being born somewhere.
just say the idea that Israel wants to stop.
And I can also believe that we shouldn't have soldiers dressing up like doctors and shooting people in hospital beds.
Of the Palestinians is vile. It is another left-wing atrocity on language, like Israel is committing genocide. Genocide has been raped, like the word racism has been raped. Every decent term has been denuded of its meaning by people on the left, not by liberals, I always draw that distinction, but by people like Cenk. They have raped the word genocide, they have raped the word racism, they have raped the word sexual attack. All the evils have been removed from their context. Israel has no interest. There are 5 times more Palestinians today than there were in 1950. It is the worst, most ineffective genocide in the history of genocide. It is a vile smear. The United Nations stinks.
Can I just throw out there that population increasing does not necessarily indicate that ethnic cleansing couldn't or hasn't occurred. Ethnic cleansing could occur from a region for security reasons, for whatever reasons the state might use to justify it. The general population could still go up due to higher birth rates. I'm just saying, like, this isn't like proof. I mean, I would say in and of itself, you could it's like one piece of a puzzle you could say, but like in and of itself, that doesn't mean anything.
The United States should leave the United Nations with every other democracy. It is a place where the Human Rights Commission has been headed by Iran, where you have Iran even heading the Women's Rights Commission.
This is all I would say to Dennis Prager. Do you think someone's more likely to become a terrorist if they're hungry, desperate, and angry, or if they're just hungry and desperate? I mean, desperate and angry. The more hungry, the less services we give them. I don't think that's going to lead to them being like, oh man, now I realize that terrorism is stupid.